December 1975, Rochester, New York. A 24-year-old engineer named Steve Sasson walks into a Kodak boardroom carrying a toaster-sized contraption held together with circuit boards and magnetic tape. He connects it to a television screen. Executives lean forward, and then for the first time in human history, a digital photograph appears. No film, no chemicals, just light converted to numbers. The room falls silent. Then someone asks the question that would cost Kodak everything. Why would anyone want to look at their pictures on a television? 37 years later, Kodak filed for bankruptcy. 130,000 jobs vanished. A company worth $31 billion at its peak crumbled to nothing. They had invented the future in that room, then they buried it. And the cognitive bias that destroyed them? You're making the same mistake right now. To understand how Kodak engineered their own destruction, you need to understand how completely they dominated photography. By the 1980s, Kodak controlled 90% of film sales and 85% of camera sales in America. Their brand was so powerful that people didn't say they were taking photos. They said they were taking Kodaks. The company employed over 145,000 people globally. Their headquarters in Rochester wasn't just a workplace, it was a small city. Generations of families built their entire lives around Kodak employment. The business model was elegant and devastating to competitors. Sell cameras cheap, then profit endlessly from film, processing, and printing. Every click of a shutter meant more money flowing into Rochester. It seemed invincible. But cracks were forming that leadership refused to see. That digital camera Sasson invented wasn't a one-time curiosity. By the early 1980s, Sony launched the Mavica, an electronic camera that stored images on floppy disks. Kodak's own internal research predicted that digital photography would eventually replace film entirely. Their own engineers wrote memos warning that the transition would come faster than anyone expected. The reports landed on executive desks. The executives read them, then they filed them away and returned to counting film profits. Why worry about a distant future when the present was so profitable? This is where we need to talk about what was happening inside the minds of Kodak's decision makers. They were trapped by something psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy. Here's how it works. You've invested heavily in something: time, money, emotional energy, reputation. When new information suggests you should abandon that investment and try something different, your brain rebels. It whispers that all those resources will be wasted if you change course, so you double down. You protect what you've built instead of building what you need. Think of it like renovating a house that sits on a crumbling foundation. You've already spent $200,000 on the kitchen and bathrooms. An engineer tells you the foundation is failing and the house needs to be demolished. Logic says cut your losses and start fresh. But your brain screams about those beautiful granite countertops, that imported tile, all that money gone forever. So you keep renovating while the foundation crumbles beneath you. That's exactly what Kodak did for 3 decades. They had billions invested in film manufacturing plants, chemical processing facilities, retail partnerships, and an entire workforce trained in analog technology. Digital photography didn't just threaten future profits, it threatened to make all those past investments worthless. And that was psychologically unbearable. The tragedy unfolded in stages. In 1981, when Sony's Mavica appeared, Kodak commissioned an internal study. The findings were clear and prophetic. Digital imaging would fundamentally change photography within 10 years. Film would begin declining. The technology would improve exponentially while costs dropped. Kodak's response? They buried the study. One executive allegedly said the technology wasn't mature enough to worry about. What he meant was that their film business was too valuable to disrupt. Throughout the 1980s, Kodak did develop digital technology. They created sensors, storage systems, even prototype cameras. But here's where the sunk cost fallacy twisted their strategy into something self-defeating. Instead of racing to lead the digital revolution, they deliberately slowed their digital efforts. They priced digital products high enough to protect film margins. They marketed film's superior quality over digital's convenience. Every business decision filtered through one unspoken question. How do we protect our existing investments? Not how do we serve the future? How do we guard the past? By the 1990s, the signals became impossible to ignore. Japanese competitors were flooding markets with affordable digital cameras. Personal computers were appearing in homes, capable of storing and displaying digital images. The internet was emerging, creating entirely new ways to share photographs instantly. Kodak's own engineers were begging leadership to accelerate digital development. One former executive later admitted they knew digital was coming. They just couldn't accept what that meant for everything they had built. The company launched digital cameras but always held back, always protected film revenue, always tried to have it both ways. They acquired a photo sharing site in 2001, years before Facebook made photo sharing universal. They had the pieces. They had the talent. But they couldn't commit, because commitment meant admitting that decades of investment in film infrastructure was heading toward worthlessness. The final collapse came with brutal speed. Between 2003 and 2011, film sales fell over 90%. Kodak's stock price plummeted from its peak of $90 per share to under $1. They sold off patents, closed factories, laid off tens of thousands of workers. In January 2012, the company that invented digital photography filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, completely overtaken by competitors who had no film legacy to protect and no past investments clouding their judgment. An entire empire destroyed not by technology they couldn't master, but by psychology they couldn't overcome. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're probably running your own personal Kodak right now. The sunk cost fallacy doesn't just affect corporate boardrooms, it affects every financial decision you make. Think about your career for a moment. Maybe you spent 4 years and $80,000 on a degree in a field you've realized you hate, or that's becoming obsolete. Every morning you drag yourself to work in that field because switching feels like admitting those 4 years were wasted. But those 4 years are gone regardless of what you do next. The only question that matters is what will make the next 4 years valuable. Yet your brain keeps showing you that tuition bill, those all-nighters, that graduation ceremony, and you stay stuck. Or consider your investment portfolio. You bought a stock at $50 per share. It's now trading at $20. Every financial analysis suggests it's heading lower, but selling means locking in your loss, making it real and permanent. So you hold, telling yourself it'll recover, because your brain cannot accept that the money you originally invested is already gone. You're not protecting your investment. You're protecting yourself from the emotional pain of admitting a mistake. Meanwhile, that money could be growing somewhere else. The same pattern appears with financial advisors and services. You've been with the same advisor for 8 years. Their returns have consistently underperformed the market. Switching would be easy, but you've built a relationship. You've paid years of fees. Leaving feels like abandoning all that history, so you stay, paying for mediocrity because your past investments have hijacked your future decision-making. How many of these patterns do you recognize in your own financial life? The difference between Kodak's collapse and survival often comes down to one thing: systems that override emotion with logic. Think back to those Kodak boardrooms where executives read reports predicting digital dominance and then ignored them. What they needed was a forced mechanism that separated their identity from their investments. Start by establishing what experienced investors call a zero-based decision framework. Every quarter, look at each major financial commitment and ask one question. If I had this money free today, knowing what I know now, would I make this same investment? Not whether you should sell because of past losses, whether you would buy at today's conditions. This simple reframe strips away sunk costs and forces present tense evaluation. If the answer is no, you have your decision, regardless of what you paid originally. Behind every financial collapse is the same invisible mistake. People confuse money already spent with money that can still be saved. Create literal separation between these categories. Track your investments in 2 columns. Column 1 shows what you originally put in. Column 2 shows current value and realistic future potential. Train yourself to make decisions exclusively from Column 2. Column 1 is history. It's useful for learning, worthless for deciding. When Kodak's leadership looked at their film infrastructure, they saw Column 1, billions invested over decades. They couldn't see Column 2, an asset with diminishing future value being outpaced by technology they themselves had invented. Perhaps most critically, build automatic review triggers into your financial calendar. Set specific dates to evaluate every major holding, subscription, and commitment. When those dates arrive, you're not deciding whether to review. The review is already scheduled. You're simply executing. This removes the emotional barrier of initiating difficult conversations with yourself. Kodak had data predicting their decline decades before bankruptcy. What they lacked was a system forcing them to act on that data before it was too late. Not every company fell into Kodak's trap. Consider Fujifilm facing the identical existential threat at the exact same time. Same industry, same timeline, completely different outcome. While Kodak protected their film legacy, Fujifilm's leadership asked a different question. What capabilities do we have that could transfer to growing markets? They discovered their expertise in chemical compounds and film coatings had applications in cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and LCD screens. They aggressively diversified, deliberately cannibalizing their own film business before competitors could do it for them. Today, Fujifilm is a thriving technology conglomerate worth billions. They survived not through luck or genius, but through a systematic refusal to let past investments dictate future strategy. Kodak had the technology to dominate the 21st century. They had the talent, the resources, the market position. What they lacked was the psychological framework to abandon what they'd built in favor of what they needed to become. Every dollar they'd invested in film became an anchor dragging them toward bankruptcy while competitors sailed past. If you found yourself in this story, whether in your career, your portfolio, or your daily financial decisions, you've already taken the first step. Awareness precedes change. If this helped you see your own sunk costs more clearly, subscribe for more insights on the psychology behind financial decisions. Here's the question that should keep you up tonight. What are you protecting right now? Not because it serves your future, but because you can't bear to admit what you've already lost.